So for those of you who are joining us right now, welcome. Thank you all of you for joining us today for the webinar, Engaging Students to Increase Public Transit Ridership, A Kingston Story. My name is Juliana Fanous, and I'm a project coordinator here at the Green Municipal Fund. This webinar is offered in English, but the audience is welcome to ask questions in French as well, and we'll be translating them to the speakers. If you do have colleagues that are missing today's webinar, the session is also being recorded and it should be online in just a few weeks. So before I introduce today's speakers, I'd like to just take a few minutes to provide a little bit of context on the Federation of Canadian Municipalities and the Green Municipal Fund. The Federation of Canadian Municipalities has been the national voice of municipal government since 1901, with diverse programs and services designed to support municipalities. Our largest program is the Green Municipal Fund, which was established in 2000, and it's currently a $625 million endowment by the Government of Canada to support municipal efforts to improve air, water, and soil quality. The fund is open to municipalities, large and small, in every province and territory. So the fund has a double mission to support municipal initiatives and sustainable development through funding, but also to share knowledge and lessons learned through online resources and tools, through trainings, through peer learning activities, and even through networking opportunities. The Green Municipal Fund is available for projects in 5 different sectors that are displayed on the screen. We have energy performance, waste reduction, brownfields, transportation, and water performance. So this funding is available to all municipal governments and their partners for plans, for studies, pilot projects, capital projects, and more. Since its inception, the fund has funded more than 1,400 initiatives in over 500 communities across all of Canada. Just to give you a quick overview of the Green Municipal Fund's transportation offer, we currently fund initiatives that focus on 2 transportation-related areas, one of which is reducing or avoiding fossil fuel use in municipal fleets. So these include projects, for example, purchasing properly sized fleet options, alternative fuel infrastructures for vehicles providing municipal services, or fuel switching or reducing fuel consumption, as well as intelligent transportation systems that reduce fuel consumption and promote transit use. The second transportation-related area is shifting to less polluting modes of transport. So examples of these would be things like ride sharing and ride hailing programs, last mile solutions, implementing bike paths and bike sharing, connecting commuters to park and ride facilities, as well as safe and accessible walking and biking networks. There are also signature projects funding that has been made available to projects that achieve significant environmental benefits beyond current best practices, which may not otherwise be accounted for in this current transportation offer. So if you do have a project in mind, feel free to contact a program's outreach advisor using the email provided on the screen, and they'll be happy to chat with you. To give you a few useful highlights that might be of interest, we do have our approved projects database, which is really a wealth of resources on our funded projects, including case studies, reports, contact information, and so on. We also encourage you to sign up for our weekly newsletter, FCM Connect, to get all the latest updates on funding, training, tools, and more. So we're just going to send 2 links in the chat box for you to keep track of. You should also be marking your calendars. We have our next Sustainable Communities Conference, which will take place in October 2020 in St. John's, Newfoundland and Labrador. This conference brings together municipal sustainability practitioners from across the country to learn from each other and to share solutions that they can bring back to their communities. In fact, the City of Kingston was one of the Sustainable Communities Awards 2018 winners for this program that we'll be discussing shortly in the transportation category. So applications for the Sustainable Communities Awards will likely launch in late 2019 or early 2020. So keep your eyes peeled for more information on FCM Connect. Just to give you a brief overview into who's attending this webinar with you, you can see on the map that we have a wide range of people listening from all across Canada. We saw people really from coast to coast. We have almost covered all of the provinces, so it's really great to see this high level of interest. And to provide a little bit of context into today's session, this webinar is really intended for you to learn more about Kingston's story in designing a program that encourages students to use public transit. So there was a free guidebook that was developed to help you discover tools and resources your own municipality can use to deliver a similar initiative. So please take a look in the chat box for a link to this resource. And to give you a quick peek into what you can expect from this guidebook, you should be able to find step-by-step information to help you implement this type of program in your own jurisdiction. There are also templates and forms available to help you with logistics and specifically orientation planning. There are answers to frequently asked questions, links to videos and other presentations to better understand the implications of this initiative, and finally, additional resources, including academic research on the impact of this program on Kingston Transit ridership. So we hope today's webinar and this guidebook will inspire and help you to create your own successful program. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our speakers for today's webinar. We have Dan Hendry, who is the Sustainable Initiatives Coordinator for the Limestone District School Board. Dan strives towards promoting sustainable initiatives for the Limestone District School Board and is the manager of community-based learning and innovation at St. Lawrence College. His concern for the environment is what drives him to take initiative in promoting sustainable solutions within the Kingston community. He continues to engage in initiatives that promote positive, sustainable change throughout the Kingston community. His combined interest in sustainability, innovation, entrepreneurship, student mentorship, and community have been well integrated into his personal, academic, and professional experiences. Dan is continuously seeking new opportunities to connect with like-minded professionals who engage in sustainable and innovative initiatives within the community. Dan is also joined today by Jeremy DaCosta, who is the Director of Transit and Fleet Services with the City of Kingston. Jeremy has been dramatically helping change Kingston's transit system over the past decade. He led initiatives such as the 2015 Kingston Transport Master Plan, the introduction of new express routes, the inclusion of real-time bus and trip information on transit apps, the extension of Sunday and holiday service, and improvements to fare options for commuters and employers. Jeremy and his team form the foundation of this program as they organize the buses, coordinate the distribution of student passes, and promote the program. Dan and Jeremy, thank you both so much for joining us today. I'm now going to hand things over to you. You should have control now.
Perfect, great. Thanks very much. So it's great to be with all of you today. I'm Jeremy. This is Dan. We're just going to turn the webcam off just to ensure that there's no issues with bandwidth or nothing breaks up, but we'll turn it on again at the end when we get to questions. So we'll just flip that off. Perfect.
Ready?
Okay, let's go.
So really, my name is Dan Hendry, and I don't work for Kingston Transit, though I have my shirt on, says I love it. I do. It's doing so much in our community. I actually work for the local school board. And I think this is an important piece of kind of the puzzle we're going to be talking about today, is how we've been kind of culturally changing our car culture to a transit culture. So if you don't mind, I'll take you through, if that's okay. So in about 20 minutes or so, we'll definitely open up for Q&A. Just making sure the slides change here. Perfect. So again, being a bit of an outsider working for the local school board, I'm very proud being in this community of kind of the attention we're getting. Like they said, there's a lot, great council support, an aggressive master plan. Kingston Transit is very customer centric. But again, focusing on the youth piece of obviously why we're going to be talking about what we've developed here today through a lot of trial and error and time and a good partnership. The City of Kingston, again, the ridership's increased by more than 73% since 2012, and we'll be focusing a lot of what we've seen helped push that from a youth point of view. So the partnership, again, I work for the local public school board here in Ontario in Kingston, and Kingston Transit operating the transit service. It really started off in 2012 with the City of Kingston. I'm going to work through this timeline. That's okay. I'm going to work through this timeline here, 2012 to where we are currently. And there are some things that happened just because of how things worked, how time worked, what we worked and figured out together. It was a really neat experience. So in 2012, in 2012, the council at the time decided to allow youth or grade 9s to ride for free and get them a free bus pass. And it was really the political push of this that started this program. I was on the school board side, and we saw the importance of this. So I'd gone to the director of education and said, listen, and this is where I come in a lot, is we have to teach them how to ride. It's not just good enough to give them a pass. There are a lot of barriers. And at 14, they don't quite yet realize the social, economic, health, or environmental factors. So you have to show them. And their parents aren't necessarily using the bus either, nor are their teachers in our case. So as we changed the culture, as they saw the value of students using the bus, we literally take a City of Kingston bus to our secondary schools. That's me. I think I've lost a couple pounds since there. I'm just joking. But we start every groups of 40 students at a time, showing them how to use the bike rack, getting them on the bus, teaching them, letting them meet the driver, talking about everything. And again, tying in the stories. There's a lot of stories that go along with this. So as I said, this is a big piece. As you can see here, this is a commissioned bus where we take it off the road, always working between peak times at Kingston Transit. And I'm going off. I have about a 20-minute kind of orientation we do. This is stopping in the transfer point, and it's being able to see the importance of these stories for students, because how can we assume that if no one's ever showed them and taught them, just because we offer them free transit doesn't mean they're going to get it. You're going to get the early adopters or the parents, but maybe not the students that need it the most. So in all actuality, this program, Teaching and Showing Students, has become a very good social equalizer in our community. And you're going to see this further in the slides of what it's done for our ridership. But for anyone from a school board or from a community point of view, getting students to extracurriculars, getting them around, it's expensive to move kids. So this isn't just getting them to school. I want to make sure you understand too, in our community, we still have yellow buses. This was never about yellow buses. It was about enabling so much more. So programs like dual credits at colleges, or volunteer opportunities, or getting to work. Plus, Jeremy will touch on this, but the fact that Kingston Transit has data-enabled shifts, we can get some very robust data of how they use the pass and when they use it. So this is a story quickly, and then I'll move on. Jeremy can continue on with some of the more data and graphs. But quite literally, it's stories like, and think about yourselves. I don't know how many of you guys use transit, but have you ever put your bike on the bus? Have you sat there in front, this is me, but with a pop tire, and 40 people looking at you because the transit operator can't get off and assist, and just not knowing, and how intimidating. Cars are going by. I was sweating. Of course, it was summer, and my helmet was a little bit too big and was flopping around. These are very intimidating for a 30-year-old, let alone maybe a 14-year-old, that it's maybe more important they know how. So we show them these are the types of things, talking about all of that, on that, as you saw, and as we've discussed, that orientation piece. And that's a big part of what I've been doing, helping on the school side, the logistics with the right teachers and principals, and talking about the value. And we've seen tremendous amount of both savings, but opportunity that it's created in other value. And we're going to touch on that as we go along. But I think I'm going to let Jeremy touch on some of the next pieces of what happened. So again, that happened in 2012 with just grade 9s. Well, 2013, 2014, and 2015. Now we do orientation for grade 9s in every year. But the students in older grades, they've been orientated in grade 9, they've now in the City of Kingston got free passes. So as of 2015, all of our system has got free bus passes. And Jeremy, if you'd like, you can take over from here if that's good.
Sure. So just before we move on, I just want to say how important the orientation piece is of this program. So when we launched the program in that initial year, that was something that we kind of missed. We didn't really appreciate the significance of the orientation. The orientation being one thing, but the distribution of the cards that are issued to the students as well. So every student, when they enter grade 9, they get a smart card, and I think Dan alluded to that here. And that card allows us to collect great data about every time a student boards the bus, where they board, when they board. And in the first years of the program, we kind of let students figure that out on their own by having to go to the mall or city hall to get the card. But then as we introduced the next grade and the next grade and the next grade until we had all the students included, we started going to the schools to do the orientation that Dan outlined, but also issuing the passes right there on site and eliminating a barrier for many, many students. So the slide that's circulating now is showing you how the ridership grew beginning in 2012 with about 28,000 rides up to now where we have every grade included. The 2016 data is on the screen, but that's essentially now where we are trending, is about 600,000 rides annually made by high school students. And that 600,000 rides now represents 10% of Kingston Transit's overall ridership.
And one cool thing, if you see that as well, you'll notice through the summer, for those that it's about engaging the youth, and it really doesn't go down too far during the summer. I mean, it's getting them around. And we're going to look at other things here. So
often when Dan and I are talking to others about this program, there's an assumption often made that most of the high school trips are made related to school travel. And as Dan said, this program was never meant to become a substitute for students getting to school by yellow school bus or other means. It really wasn't where it began. And when you look at the data here, it helps to illustrate that the way in which students are using public transit is much, much more than just getting to and from school. So there's two charts here on the screen. The first one is showing you by day of week when students are taking public transit, and it's about an 85% split weekday to 15% weekend. But the next slide, the second pie chart there on the screen on the bottom, I think is the most compelling. And you've got 60% of trips being taken related to school. And when we say school trips, we identify that as a trip taken on a weekday, either just before school or at dismissal time. Otherwise, the remaining about 40% of trips are taking place outside of those periods. So middle of the day, evenings, weekends, holidays, PA days, Christmas vacation, March break, summer break. So 60%, yes, are related to traveling to and from school. 40% of the trips are not. And for the City of Kingston, that's a really, really important piece of information about what we're trying to do here to get more young people to take the bus for all of their all of their needs and all of their destinations. And we would not have been able to collect this data without making sure that every student was issued one of our smart cards for our smart card fare system. And that's a really important piece of advice for anybody who's thinking about this, is the data is so important to both confirm your ridership, but also to sort of justify the implementation of your program. Without having this data in the early stages of our implementation, it would have been really hard to justify how we would add additional grades. So having this information from the beginning with our grade 9 students, and then with our grade 9 and 10 students, 9, 10, 11, and then now all high school students, really important.
You want to do this one? This is it.
So here, I can speak to this, sure. So it's building on the importance of data and the impact of the program. We engaged with the University of Waterloo, Dr. Jeff Casello, who some of you may know, and one of his graduate students to do a research thesis beyond just the quantitative data that I've shared with you, but they also looked at some of the qualitative data that was coming out of the program, and they actually did an outreach to students and parents to look at the value of the program. And I would encourage you, you can find that thesis, it's a public document, and it does a really nice job summarizing some of the additional benefits, speaking to independence, speaking to the ability to participate in activities that they otherwise would never have participated in.
As well as the fact that if you see there, it shows after she came in and I worked with her through the school board. And it shows that grade 12s use it on average 3 times more as a grade 9, showing that as they progress with more responsibility, they use it more. As well as what I thought was important for those listening out there is that she said for those mid-sized communities or other communities, this could act as a really important transit stimulant for these communities. It can be picked up and put different places in North America with tweaking. Of course, all our communities are different, but there's a piece of this that could probably exist in some fashion for wherever you're listening from. And if you want a copy of this as well, we can send it out via the FCM. There is a full 100-plus page thesis on just the qualitative and quantitative impact of free transit on youth travel behavior. It's put out by the University of Waterloo, Veronica Sullivan, and this is in 2017, so it's a couple years older now. We've done different things since, but it's a very good read, and it's full of really good information. So bringing it back, so this is a really important piece, actually, and we'll talk a bit about it for 2 ways. So at this point, again, and me being a bit of an outsider, I don't work for transit, but always observing and participating. We've got to the point now in 2017 that the high school system's matured. I'd say politically on both the city side and the school board side for trustees, everyone was enthralled. We're starting to see savings, more students using the bus, more engagement, and all these things that are going on, all these ripple effects, like programs in your community, like, for example, Pathways to Education that had money for transportation they were giving for bus chits was now going into food prompts to help students that, you know, as for a reward for coming to some of these programs. So all these great stories emerged. And a lot of parents stopped, you know, once they realized how I was involved, they stopped and say, oh, wow, like, it's been such a great, we're 2 working people, just so my son or daughter could meet me at the mall instead of me having to drive downtown. It's really helped us all. But in 2017, and Jeremy, you can speak to this more, this was important because there was a fair change to our structure. So not only did it did some really neat things. I'm a bit of a transit nerd now, I'll tell you the truth.
So in 2017, we were undertaking our fare review that we do every 3 years. Many transits do this, looking at their fare structure and what is charged to board a bus. When we looked at where we sat leading up to 2017, with the introduction of the high school program, there was very little revenue left in our youth category. And so it was an opportunity for us to consider whether we could open up free transit to more young people. And in January 2017, we then began offering free transit to all children 14 and under. So anybody in the City of Kingston attending high school who is 14 and under, they all now ride Kingston Transit for free. And we like to share this part of the story because we didn't start here, but we got here. And so incrementally, we got to this place. We started with grade 9s, grade 10s, grade 11s, grade 12s, and that provided a foundation to understand how we could engage even more youth to be active on public transit.
Well, I think there's 2 other pieces here. One thing that, you know, we've said often too, I sometimes get, I'm weary of the word free, because really, if you look at these 2 programs that kind of became over time, the high school program, there is money going in. The school board chips in Ontario. The Ontario gas tax helps out. But really, it was about that idea of training ridership. I mean, at 15 in high school, or you know, in high school, they don't drive yet. So you're giving them freedom at a younger age, with responsibility, of course. But I think it's really important to know that, you know, you're normalizing something that nobody else has normalized for them maybe in their lives, and it gives them another way of freedom and a confidence. I see a lot of students now going off from Kingston to other communities, and they have confidence when travel in Ottawa. And my friend's son, actually from Peterborough, he was going to Trent, and he said, you know what? When his dad pulled up and they wanted to show around, he said, no, I'll just take the bus. Like, he had enough confidence to go to another community and figure out the transit system. And the only other thing I'd say about the free child is, like Jeremy had said, the idea was, you know, yes, there was less revenue coming in for youth and the former structure. But what I like to look at too is, and what Jeremy had said to me, he said, yeah, but it's about the parents, you know, it's about the families, it's about groups going together. And that kind of enabled the next part of our story. However, the only other thing I'd like to say about the fare structure is that now the Kingston Transit has this middle mark. The youth is paid slightly smaller amount for a monthly fee, but 15 to 24. And this is exciting for us to see as we're kind of slowly starting to see, because this fare structure only came in a couple years ago, this idea that after they're done and you've normalized it from young until high school, you know, do they buy it, right? So as we continue on here, this kind of started the next program that we were sitting together and saying, well, how do we get more people on the bus? And we looked at something, and we're thinking about the school day. And these buses that were designing for peak, and there's some room during the school day. So we actually worked out another deal, and we've created it in the City of Kingston. And this is a kindergarten class, and this is a real bus that was not staged. I just got a crew coming with us, and this was students using the bus on a busier route in Kingston, going down through Queens, but to get down to a museum. And we know last year we call it the field trip pass. And again, they don't have to call in, they show up. It's nice if there's big events, because sometimes there's little things that transit it helps with. But this idea of getting students out to museums, the local theater, which is again the City of Kingston owned, a different department, parks, wherever, the farmers market, cultural pieces, it also normalizes that. Look at that age, they're in kindergarten, and they're learning about responsibility. So what the pass is, it's on the lanyard. The teacher can grab it from the office, get down to a bus stop, and get on there. And what this does is, as you can see, she's walking down with the students to Queen's University. It helps with daily physical activity, but that pass covers the whole class with one tap. So, we already know the kids are free. That pass also covers the parents, the EAs, the ECEs, the teachers, any other chaperones, and the board. We work back from how many trips have happened, and we make sure that we pay a nominal small amount for actually what the value we're getting. And we're actually creating a lot more experiential learning, because we surveyed a lot of the 80+ teachers responded, and they said we're having more class trips because of this option. So as you can see here, do you want me to keep on going? The other nice thing you see is just the engagements in the community. So these are all teachers, and again, thinking of how important now more than ever to collaborate in communities and realize efficiencies between some of our assets and different systems. Sometimes I think for those school boards listening, or even the municipalities listening, from my side as a school board employee, we're in slightly different businesses, and sometimes our calendars don't line up, different priorities, but this is one to really get on, I think, literally and figuratively, the bus together. See that dad joke?
Not bad.
So you want to talk a bit about partnerships and collaboration?
Sure. So by extension, I think one of the themes you're picking up, hopefully from our conversation here, is that the partnership between the school board and the municipality is critical in terms of having a program like this be successful. So we've got the high school program, we've introduced this field trip program, and a further extension of that is this great partnership we created with one of the art programs at the school board, where the students actually engaged with us, and we had their art placed on a bus. And Dan will show you. We'll flip the slides and we'll show you. And so it was just an awesome connection between the high school program, the curriculum, and then having that art reflected on one of our public transit assets that went throughout the community for a year. So it's a great display and demonstration of the value of the partnership between the city and the school board.
When I think, and it's not out yet, but it's funny, that was last year, and this year's iteration is the students are actually decorating bus shelters in the community. Again, it's a great opportunity for these students to have the pride. I mean, I remember it was like one of those shows where you unveil the house that was made, the pride of us coming around the corner, them seeing our bus. There was complete ownership, and it's just a great way to show how different pieces of the curriculum get integrated. These field trips are helping kids. Mm-hmm. This as a canvas. Again, whenever any of us see that bus go by, it's our bus, and it's a really neat thing. And if you notice, they were tasked to, in their little Google bubble there, to how the buses help them. So where they go, what they do, and again, this gets to go in their portfolio for those that are applying for post-secondary education. So there's definitely some more pieces. I think we'd like to stop it there. We still have a bit of time, but I think that this is the type of thing that hopefully we can situationalize some of our learning and help for those that are listening with questions in your communities.
Awesome. Thank you both for a very comprehensive presentations and for taking us through the timeline and major milestones of the program. It's been really helpful. We still have a lot of time for questions. We have about 25 minutes, I would say. So we did have a few coming in from the audience, and I encourage the rest of you to feel free to keep them coming in. We're going to try to aim to get through as many of these as possible. So Dan and Jeremy, we do have a mix of clarification questions and some that are more related to the implementation of the program. So I'm going to start off with a few of the clarifying ones. So some people did ask a little bit about whether or not there were challenges with the Yellow School Bus Drivers Union. Were there any concerns of reducing jobs or anything related to that?
Boy, that's not a question I think we've ever had. I'm not aware of any concerns that were raised by the school bus companies or those that represent them. No, I'm not aware of anything like that. In fact, I would say the opposite has happened, where we've actually developed a stronger relationship with the consortium that looks after school buses in terms of trying to understand how we can support each other in terms of them allowing them using their resources more efficiently to create routes that make more sense while still relying on public transit. And that's an active conversation we're currently in with them right now. So no, we've not had that issue come up that I'm aware of.
Yeah, and I mean, it depends on what piece. I think the reality is the high school piece, it never interferes. I mean, it still runs. And as for some of the field trip stuff, I'm sure there's not the consortiums, it's a fee for service, right? Like they're renting it for that field trip. But I think I always look at the value it's creating, because it's actually creating more teachers are having more trips because of the ease of this and the less of the financial burden. So in no ways have we seen that on our board side, because our yellow buses still run in parallel. As well as Limestone, we have the City of Kingston, but for some people with more rural sites, we do have a large portion of our district is rural, so we'll always have yellow buses in that area.
Great, thanks for clarifying. So I think we should just tackle a few more of these types of questions before we head into the implementation portion. There was a question about whether or not these free passes included homeschooling students.
Yes, they do, but it didn't start out that way. So that is absolutely a learning for anybody who's thinking about this. So we started the program. It was not intentional. It was just something that we had not considered. And so it began where homeschooled students were not included. And then it was either in the second year or third year, it was in the early years that we acknowledged that those students who have chosen to be homeschooled, who live in the city, should have access as well. So provision was made to allow them to receive the pass. So unlike the high school sites where we go and do an orientation on site, we ask those students to come to our site here at Kingston Transit, and we issue the pass here and provide them an orientation, essentially one-on-one.
The other side that actually came up, that it's kind of a little bit different, but what you're seeing too is kind of picking that knowledge from people that kind of lived it, right, and went through it. And it was the other side of what happens if you have people coming back to get their high school diploma, and they're coming back a little bit later in life for that, right? And what I mean by that is transit had to figure out that line. For us, of course, from Limestone, we'd always want, our students. For transit, the program was around training and building that culture. So we did come to the agreement that it was 21 and under for what a high school student was defined as. Also, that difference of where are you in grade 9 or 10 or 11, just that grade piece. So it's nice that we have now a difference as well with the ages, because those are the little nuances that were different between systems.
Great, thanks for sharing. We do have a lot of questions about financing and funding. So I was wondering if you could speak a little bit towards how you received council buy-in, especially relating to the subsidy that you received from the school district. Could you speak to how that was determined, the amount, if there was a formula in mind?
Okay, we can try. I'll begin by saying that this initially was started without any sort of view to the financial components. It's not that it was ignored, but it was about creating the vision of having more young people take transit. And it's important that you start the conversation from there. So that's really important. The conversation for us here in Kingston started from that point. But with respect to the financials, to be honest, in the first year, we didn't have any data to rely on. And so our ask of the school board, the municipality's ask of the school board, was really finding a point where we kind of just felt comfortable. The school boards felt comfortable with the level of contribution they could make, and we felt comfortable that that contribution likely represented the number of trips that we were going to provide to grade 9 students in that first year. So we arrived at the number of $15,000. And again, that's going to be relative to our system. And so we asked the school boards to contribute $15,000 in that first year. And then with every subsequent grade that was added, we asked the school boards to contribute an additional $15,000. So today the school boards jointly contribute $60,000 to the high school program. And then as Dan said, they make another contribution as it relates to the field trip program. I think the value is arrived at in a couple of different ways. One is there certainly are a number of trips that are related to school travel, and there was a recognition by the school boards that perhaps those are trips they should have more responsibility for from a financial perspective. But those other trips that as I showed you in the pie chart, outside of school travel, the municipality, I think, feels a responsibility or an accountability to ensure that those students have access outside of school hours. So the value that the school boards arrived at, and we continue to work to today, is reflective of the usage around school hours versus the usage around non-school hours, and the respective contribution of both parties around that ridership.
Well, and just so we clarify too, in Kingston, when we say school board, so I'm Limestone, the public school board. The other side is the Algonquin and Lakeshore Catholic District School Board, which is, we split things usually 2/3 because we're a bit bigger by 1/3. So we have the two boards chipping in for that. The other thing is too, sometimes when you're starting off, it's like, well, where do I find the money? Because it's not taking over from Yellow Bus. But what we realize too is that there's different pots of money. So things like in Ontario, we have cooperative education, and students were getting bus chits to help get them to co-op. So this helped with that budget, that took that over. So the first couple of years we figured it out. But after a while, you started to actually see monetary savings. We have in Limestone, we used to provide yellow bus service for summer school, but now in the City of Kingston, they can rely on Kingston Transit, and that was some savings. So there are annual savings by little tweaks in the system, but it was never about replacement of yellow bus. So the finances were a bit creative, but also coming from different pots that every year we were spending money on moving kids.
Great, thank you for that overview. We do have an interesting question about whether or not you considered partnering with other stakeholders like local businesses, since they might be benefiting from these types of from the trips that students take outside of school.
Great question. I would say that we've not spent a lot of time thinking about how that would look. Although what I will say is that our sales outlets that provide passes to students, although we go to the school and issue the grade 9 passes, there are students in other grades who don't participate in that or lose their pass, or the pass no longer works. And what I will say is those sales outlets have recognized very much the value in having students come to their locations, line up, get a transit pass, and then maybe stick around and be a consumer in that commercial facility. So we've had great partnerships, certainly with our sales outlets around that. However, in terms of a financial contribution or a contribution through sponsorship around the program, that's not something we've explored, at least not to this point.
Well, I think one other piece to that is just from the basis of the school board, myself and Jeremy at Kingston Transit, we actually, there's no contract between our organizations either. I think that's important because it's a bit of a handshake. We both see tremendous value, but keeping it nimble allowed us to make different decisions. Like, for example, when we print and give cards on site now, the first year we didn't. We had to take kids down to the printer at City Hall or our local mall, which had that, and it was a lot more difficult. So things we've learned, and it's in the guidebook too, but through that process of just trying it out, there was a lot of things that we gathered from that. But I think it's about the simplicity. It's super complex, don't get me wrong. It's not hard. It's just a lot of movement, a lot of people. But because there's so much value on both sides, I find a lot of people are willing to do it, but also keeping it somewhat simple in the way of just knowing how to work together and what my role is and what his role is. We've been able to do a lot.
Great. So we do have quite a few questions still related to funding and particularly your partnership with the local government. So someone was actually wondering if private school students were able to get free student passes. How did you make the business case to your municipality to allow them to fund private school systems?
So I think I understand the question. So in the City of Kingston, we have two very large school boards, the Public School Board and the Algonquin Catholic School Board, who are the funders of this program. And there are other school boards. We talked about homeschooling already. We're now talking about private schools. Those organizations don't make a financial contribution because the number of students is relatively small compared to the larger school boards. So we've not concerned ourselves with trying to attach a value, a financial value, seeking a financial contribution from those smaller entities. The larger school boards have recognized that they have a larger role to play. They've recognized that their contribution should be greater, and that's how it has continued. So we've not attached a financial value. We don't have any sort of formal arrangement with those others, but because they are high school students attending a high school in Kingston, homeschool, private school, another smaller school board, they are eligible, and we offer the same access to transit.
Yeah, that was really clear. Thank you for that, Jeremy. So could you speak to whether or not there was a revenue loss by providing the service to students?
Yes, I guess there is a revenue lost immediately. So any fares that you're collecting at the fare box, those are not going to be there anymore. That's very obvious. Here in the province of Ontario, let me back up. So there was a revenue loss. The school boards make their contribution, which we've talked about, which helps offset some of the loss. But the other really important thing for those listening in Ontario who have access to provincial gas tax funding that's tied to revenue ridership is that these rides qualify for revenue rides. And so in the City of Kingston, based upon our ridership and population and the gas tax funding, every time a high school student boards the bus, the City of Kingston gets about 50 cents per ride provincial gas tax contribution, which essentially offsets all of the revenue we were collecting from the high school ridership demographic. So yes, we of course collect nothing at the fare box. The school boards make a contribution. There's a contribution that comes in from the provincial government. And in Kingston's case, with our 600,000 trips annually, the program now is essentially break even. Sorry, I shouldn't say quite break even. The program has more than recovered, or has recovered all the revenue we once collected, is I think a more accurate statement.
And I do think, like, now observing kind of from another side, because it's been, almost 7+ years, it's why, right? Like, the way I look at transit systems, and as a user myself, is you need a good transit system to change someone's behavior to come over. Like it's a chicken and egg game. You need a good transit system to have ridership, but you need ridership to have a good transit system. And so you're looking at kind of Donello Meadow as like a point in which a leverage point, like somewhere where you can get in. And I think this is it, because again, I have a young daughter. Is how many things, if somebody as an adult comes and tells me to change my behavior, I might not listen the same way as if my daughter did. So if we're training these youth, we're seeing a lot more, I would say, families, and it's adding this ridership. The increase was plus, over 70%. I think in 2012 it was like 3.5 million, and now over 7?
Or almost to 7 million.
Yeah.
Right.
So that's not just the kids, but they've helped bring people on the bus as well. Now that there's that difference in 17+, and it's too early yet, and there would have to be more of an in-depth study, but what we feel is that this is helping make riders, which bypasses, right?
Absolutely. Thanks for answering these. I think we're going to move a little bit away from the funding questions and change our gears a little bit. We had a really interesting question relating to health and wellness. Actually, someone was wondering whether or not you've engaged with your local health authority around this initiative, and if you're thinking of measuring things like social and emotional wellness outcomes. If that's something you're considering.
We've definitely not at like rolling it out. It might be a way, depending on relationships in other communities. It's definitely something that's from the board. We highlighted on a lot of things around partnerships and health and wellness. Like I know from a stat I did a while ago with some active transportation stuff I was working on, saying that people that take transit are 64% more likely to get their daily physical activity. And I can totally see that. So I think that'd be a great partner, depending, I guess, on what community. In ours, they're aware of it. They're highly, championing it in the communities, and as well as helping, because there's always school health nurses that go into the system. So part of the board is just, we have 50 plus schools. I mean, this program's not affected by all of them because there's some rural and urban different communities as well. But I think it's anyone that can help spread the knowledge of how it works and demystify, is that a word? Demystify?
Demystify.
Yeah, that's the one. That's why I bring them along. I'm just joking. But my point rather is just, there's going to be some groups that, look at the different value points. Now, this is what I talk to students on the bus about. What about health? What about those interested in the environment? What about those who want to save up? Like the average car cost in Canada, I've heard of things of operationally, it's between $7 to $8, $9 grand a year. Just all these things factor in the economic, social, environmental health. So I think whatever partners want to get involved, there's a lot of people that you can see the benefit from what this is doing, especially from a social equity piece of, and even student engagement. I think there's a lot of value there, and the public health could be a great vehicle for helping.
Great, thanks for that overview. So we have gone quite a few questions surrounding data and tracking. Could you tell us a little bit about how you monitor usage? If, for example, you have any scanning technology that electronically counts ridership?
Yeah, sure. So we do have a smart card fare box system here, and like I said, every student is issued a smart card, and they must have the card and they must use it when they board. And every time they use the card, it tracks where they boarded, when they boarded, the route, the time of day, all that really great information that we can use for data analysis later. That's kind of how it happens. The data is available each day. We typically look at our ridership data here on a monthly basis and on an annual basis, and then we slice and dice it in some of the ways I shared before around time of day, day of week, location as well. So it tracks their GPS. It pinpoints where they're boarding the bus in terms of GPS location. And if you look at the University of Waterloo study, you'll see some of that data that was used to identify and draw some conclusions about the types of trips that students were making, why they were making the trips, and what their purpose of the trip was. If you have means in your community to do that with your fare box collection system and with your transit agency, you should really do that. When we started the program, we actually thought maybe we would just allow students to use their high school pass, right, like that laminated photo ID, and we contemplated that, and we thought maybe that's what we should do because it's easy, it's quick, they already have it, there's not another process, and we are so happy that we did not go that route because the data we collected in year one was critical to understand actual utilization. The other nice thing about the data, the passes we issue, is we are able to track by grade and by school board as well. So you can further refine the data to understand what grade level is using it as well and what school board is using it, so that you have another look at the data, another way to frame the data.
Well, and from a school board point of view, that was I think we mitigated something here because one of our local high schools, it was closed down, and they're consolidating and building a new school. Well, this also we got ahead of, and when students had to go to other schools for the last couple of years, we made sure that we had extra orientation for those students that might be moving a little bit further in the community. It really helped, I think, move people around in that point. So it just really neat to get down and cluster areas around the school to see who's getting on the bus, and when they're going back home, you can see it kind of flip-flop. So it's really helped from a school point of view to help mitigate, I think, some situations around students having to travel during the build of this new site.
Great. So keeping along the lines of this data and tracking topic, this next question has gotten a lot of traction from the audience, and they're wondering if the habits that were instilled during their high school orientation by taking the bus actually kept up after they graduated, so whether or not the adult ridership has actually increased based on the behaviors of their secondary school.
Yeah, a great question that I wish we had a more fulfilling answer for you. This is something that we've now recognized that we want to come back and do. So we did that study with the University of Waterloo a couple of years ago, looking at students, how they were using the transit system, what they were using it for. We would love to go back and now re-engage with that group and using University of Waterloo again to understand how travel behavior has changed over time. So we don't have a lot of hard data to point to, but one of the things that we can point to is the number of, and this is something we track every month, the number of passes we issue to youth. So those that are completing high school and entering life. And what I can tell you is that those numbers have essentially doubled since this time 2 years ago. So this time 2 years ago, we had half as many young people with a monthly transit pass. There are so many factors at play that could be influencing that. So it's difficult to say for certain that growth, that essentially doubling the number of young people with a monthly pass is related to this program. But I think I would be confident in saying to you, there certainly is some cause and effect between the program, those students who are coming out of grade 12, who have been part of the program for 4 years, and who are now thinking and understanding and have the knowledge that transit can actually get them to the destinations they need to get to and want to get to. So we have some of that data in our monthly sales data, but we would love to go back and do a more in-depth research-based approach, again, like we did earlier on in the program.
And I think just quickly, just even watching the amount of students come off and on the bus and how much when you're around the community you see them there. It's just also that fact of when I was that age, that wasn't me, right? I traveled a lot and kind of gained transit over time and used it here. But I think it's that how many people leave the house in the morning and only think of one option. So for me, even the fact that as they grow, transit's now in their toolkit. It's something they feel comfortable, they integrate into their planning, and their mobility patterns have shifted, and they feel comfortable in that. I think it's a very important piece of what we're doing here.
Good. So we've also gotten a lot of questions relating to marketing, communication, and messaging. So people were actually wondering if there were any ways for you to incentivize and attract youth to take public transit. For instance, instead of having students ask their parents for a ride, is there a means that you've done that?
So there's a couple of things. Jeremy, I'll let you start off with one of the incentives.
Sure. Boy, there's so much to talk about here. I think what I'll start by saying is we did nothing that would be considered traditional. So there were no print ads, like no newspaper ads, no radio ads, some of the traditional media things. We really did none of that. It was a very grassroots-based approach. And so if you think back to what Dan was sharing with you about the orientation, that's really where the energy was spent. That's really where we spent our time, was on the ground with the students. So if you are thinking about this program and you've got any opportunity to allocate your budget, I think you really want to focus it on what can you do to get to the school, what can you do to get your transit agency with you to the school, who can you find, somebody as dynamic as Dan, to run those orientations for you. It's an energetic, what do you do, 30 minutes? Yeah. It's an energetic, engaging opportunity for the students. I think that's where it begins. But I'll tell you the other thing that we didn't realize at the beginning is that in many ways, you're also opening up a conversation with the parents. So it's one thing to talk to the students. It's another thing to figure out how do you engage with the parents who may have never taken a public transit bus, aren't familiar with it, have some anxiety about it. So I think there's something to be said about doing some work in conversation and in messaging with the parents as much as it is with the students. A parent, like myself, I've got a 12-year-old son, takes the bus everywhere on his own a lot of the time, maybe not at night yet because he's only 12, but he does take the bus everywhere because in our household, the parents understand that has value for us. It's a trip I don't have to take to the mall. It's a trip I don't have to take back to the mall. So I think for me, it's those two things. It's getting to the students, getting them at the school, getting the schools actively participating and making them available to participate in the orientation, and then talking to the parents and having an opportunity to have a conversation with the parents. And that in your community may look different, and there may be different ways to do that. I guess the other thing, Dan, is I would say, thinking back, it's also the conversation with the principals and the teachers. And I know that's sort of related to the school orientation, but in the early days, there was no real buy-in.
But, and there was no, we didn't see the value. Well, I did. I mean, I used it, and we were kind of championing from site by site. Until now, it's very systemic. I just sent the email yesterday. 4 of the 6 schools have already signed up, right? Like they want their spot, and it's usually the first week of school. We get it right in because it's provided and it shows how much value. Like any principal would be looking at this camera right now and saying it's changed the culture of my school. And I think that's part of it too, is what we're talking about, is putting the resources into it. Sometimes it's a little dirty. You got to figure it out. We worked together and figured it all out, and now it's running quite smoothly. We're keeping the balls in the air, but it's the idea of, it's not a billboard or the radio or having that conversation. It's showing them how, because the reality is, they don't know how, and other people in their community or in their system of influence, they don't necessarily use the bus. So, and then the equity piece of everybody gets it in grade 9. It's not rich, poor, big, small. It's freedom. And I think what I've learned being on the bus and watching them, and how I watched one time, one student said, "No, I didn't get one. I was beside me," and the other kid, "Well, okay, well, I'll go to the mall with you. We get you. It's so cool." So letting them work together and promote it is way more effective than anything this old guy will do,
Yeah, and that's, Dan, that's so important as well, is that culture that's been created. I don't want to say we spend no effort, because there's a lot of effort put into this now, but there is almost no effort. And your example of sending that email to the schools yesterday to say, hey, can we find that date? They're almost chasing us now to say, 100%. When are you coming to the school? And so it's the way in which we built that culture, that foundational cultural change piece on this, that really requires now very little effort in terms of marketing or communications pieces.
They expect
it's just an expectation.
Yeah, 100%.
Awesome. So I think we're nearing towards the end of the webinar, but before we go, I want to take the opportunity to ask if you have any final key takeaways from the project, whether it's opportunities or successes or lessons you've learned, whatever you're willing to share.
I'll go first.
All right, go ahead.
Okay. Well, one thing I want to put out there for anyone, I mean, my information's there, and Jeremy, we'll come back if you need us to have a quick chat, talk to a group of people in your community via Skype or whatever. We've done that since we were at the FCM a year ago, or 2018. The other thing is, I've already lined up some dates in September and August. Like, if there's a couple people that want to come to Kingston and just observe it, send me an email if you want to come check it out. I have some dates that we could work back from. You can come on the bus with me. You can come see how we set it up. Like, any support we can do I think it's really important. In my mind, this is something that my background in sustainability and systems, and I studied in Sweden, and it is, for my narrative, it's about the environment. It's something that I've seen, we're changing a culture that might not be single occupancy vehicle users, and maybe they are a bit too, but it's still in their toolkit. And I think for reduction of greenhouse gases is really important to me personally, and that's why I'm very passionate about this. Again, I've echoed a lot, and I've said it a lot. So the only thing, there's lots of little things, it's all in the book, and we can answer any specific question, but knowing how the system works, like getting a point person at the school, talking to them, helping with the field trip pass, like, because they're going off site, making sure that because they're young, that they sign off on that same field trip pass, and the parents or the guardians know that they're getting a bus pass that day, because again, they're in our school system, they're under 18, right? So I think that's important, but I cannot, and I think you've heard it through everything we've said, I can't emphasize enough the importance of orientation and showing them how. Because when was the last thing you did that nobody taught you how to do, right? Like, we're all taught by culture, and this is a great point to interject and kind of get them before 16. And I think this is something we didn't necessarily totally plan the same way it's evolved, but what we've got going seems to be working here. So hopefully you can take some of that. And again, any specific questions, I know there's probably things we haven't answered because you have a specific situation. If anything we could do to help answer that, I'd love to, because I want to see this move across Canada.
And for me, just thinking about some of the things we talked today, and maybe something we haven't talked about, and my comment is going to be directed at, I think, the transit agencies and city councilors, mayors who are listening, is Dan and I are pretty excited about this program now in 2019. I can tell you, like any administrator back in 2011 and 2012 when we were thinking about this, I was somebody who had many concerns. And if you look for some of our early council reports on this topic, you will sense hesitation, you will sense concern, and so I think that's a natural feeling. And what I might suggest or offer as advice is, if you're thinking, your gut is saying, this is what we want to do, this is what needs to happen in our community, we need to engage more young people in public transit, then I would say to you, do what we did in Kingston and start with something, and start small and get going and see what happens. I think if we had tried to bring all of the grades on all at once and made free transit free for everybody all at the same time and reduced our youth passes rates, and did the field trip pass, I think if we tried to do that all at once, our system couldn't handle it. But I also don't think we would get the buy-in that we've had as we've incrementally implemented this over several years. So that'd be sort of my takeaway looking back at the program is, and as Dan said, the nuts and bolts are in the guide, but get going, try something, see how it works in your community.
I worked for the school board in the city that first year, and when we had to take kids down to City Hall to get it because we didn't have a mobile printer, and I'll tell you this, there's that one day I thought I was going to be fired for both my jobs, okay? Because people had said, "Dan, what are you doing with these 80 kids running around City Hall?" So, I mean, there's things we've learned, even things through the process of getting mobile printers. And, yeah, but I definitely agree, like the push and the political side of just starting somewhere and trying it out. It's doing a lot of good for our community, so you'll start to see all the voices saying, "Hey, this is helping. Hey, how can I help? Hey, this is interesting," you know, so it's done a lot of good.
Yeah, and I might say to the politicians maybe on the phone is, your administrators, like me, are going to have concern, and they're going to raise some flags. There's no question about that, and that's going to be natural. So let's figure out a way you can start. Think about a way you can get going. Like I said, to try it out and see what happens.
Wow, thank you both again so much for taking the time to share your story with us. I'd just like to remind everyone that some of the questions that we were unable to tackle during the Q&A period, you might be able to find those answers in the guidebook itself. Otherwise, you have both Dan and Jeremy's contact information. So the recording from today's session, including the audio and video, should be available within a few weeks on the FCM YouTube channel. Another point, I'd like to remind all of you before you sign off that we'd love to hear from you and have your feedback. So please take a moment to complete our participant feedback form after the webinar that should appear in a pop-up window and in the follow-up email. So again, thank you very much to Dan and Jeremy for sharing their expertise with us. And thank you to the audience as well. So have a great rest of your day.